Welcome to Grandpa Explains. Settle in. However you're lying right now, let your shoulders drop a little further into the bed. There's nowhere to be tonight. Nothing to solve, nothing to remember, nothing you have to carry out of this room. You can let your eyes close whenever they want to. I'll keep talking, slow and low, and if you drift off somewhere in the middle, that's exactly right. That's the whole idea. Tonight I want to tell you about a single word, one strange little word that a man borrowed from a book almost nobody has ever finished reading. And that word, quietly, without most people ever noticing, became the secret blueprint behind some of the biggest stories the world has ever told. The story of Luke Skywalker out among the stars, the story of a lion cub exiled from his home and called back to it. The story carved into clay tablets in ancient Sumer, the oldest written tale we have, the Epic of Gilgamesh. Different worlds, different centuries, the same hidden skeleton underneath them all. The word is monomyth. Mono meaning one, myth meaning story, the one story. And here is the first surprise, the first little thread to pull on as you lie there. The man who made that word famous didn't actually invent it. He found it. He lifted it, the way you might pick up a smooth stone from a riverbed and slip it into your pocket. He took it from a novel by an Irish writer named James Joyce, a novel called Finnegan's Wake, published in 1939. Now, Finnegan's Wake is one of the most famously difficult books ever written. It's a swirl of invented words and puns and dream logic, a book that scholars argue about and most readers put down after a few pages, baffled and a little dizzy. Buried somewhere in all that strangeness, Joyce had coined this word, monomyth, the one myth. And a scholar named Joseph Campbell, reading widely the way curious people do, came across it and thought, yes, that's the name for the thing I've been chasing my whole life. So already, before we've even properly begun, you can feel how stories pass things down. A word made up in a dream of a novel becomes the key that unlocks Star Wars. That's the kind of quiet inheritance I want to walk you through tonight. Slowly, the way you'd walk through an old house, room by room, in the dark, your hand trailing along the wall. Let me give you the second surprise now, because it's the one that catches most people off guard, and it's a good one to sink into before sleep takes you. You have almost certainly heard of something called the hero's journey. Maybe you've seen the diagram, a circle divided into stages like the face of a clock. 12 steps usually, the ordinary world at the top, then the call to adventure, then crossing the threshold, trials, an ordeal, a reward, the road back, a return home transformed. 12 neat stations arranged around a wheel. It gets taped to the walls of screenwriters. It gets taught in classrooms. It gets quoted in 1,000 videos and 1,000 books. The 12-step hero's journey. Everybody half knows it. Here's the thing though, those 12 steps, they aren't Joseph Campbell's. I know, after all that, after telling you Campbell is the man behind the monomyth, I'm now telling you the famous 12-step version most people quote isn't really his. And that's true. It's one of those facts that once you see it, you can't unsee. The version everybody recites was streamlined and shaped decades after Campbell did his work by another man entirely, a man named Christopher Vogler. And Vogler wasn't an ancient scholar in a tower of books. He was a story consultant working in Hollywood at Disney in the 1980s. He'd read Campbell's big, dense, sometimes overwhelming masterwork, and he realized something practical. He realized that the working screenwriters and the studio executives around him were never going to wade through hundreds of pages of mythology and psychology and footnotes about gods and goddesses from cultures they'd never heard of. They were busy people making films on deadlines. So Vogler did them a favor. He sat down and he distilled Campbell's enormous idea into something short, something usable. He wrote a memo. 7 pages, just 7 pages, an internal document passed around the offices with the title, roughly, A Practical Guide to the Hero with 1,000 Faces. 7 pages, that's all it was at first, a cheat sheet for tired screenwriters. And that little memo started to travel. It got photocopied, it got passed hand to hand through the corridors of Hollywood, from one writer to another, the way a good recipe gets passed around a family. And those 12 clean stages Vogler had laid out began to shape the very films coming out of the studios. Eventually, Vogler expanded that memo into a full book, published in 1992, called The Writer's Journey. And that book, that 12-stage structure, is what most of the world now thinks of when they hear the words hero's journey. So sit with that for a moment, in the quiet. The diagram on the classroom wall, the one everyone treats as ancient, sacred knowledge handed down from the mists of myth, actually began its modern life as a short office memo at a movie studio. Vogler took Campbell's strange, sprawling, deeply psychological vision, and he tidied it, he simplified it, he made it fit on a single page a busy person could glance at between meetings. And in doing so, he made it useful, yes, but he also flattened it. He smoothed away a great deal of the strangeness, the wild edges, the deep water underneath. Because Campbell's own version was not 12 tidy steps, we'll come to the real shape of it in a little while, the real map, with all its odd and beautiful stages. But for now, let that first idea settle in you like a stone settling to the bottom of a still pond. The famous version is the laundered one, the Hollywood-friendly one. And underneath it, there's something older, stranger, and far more interesting. Something that was never really about spaceships or lions or dragons at all. We'll get to that, I promise, there's no hurry. So who was this man, this Joseph Campbell, who reached into a difficult Irish novel and pulled out the word that would name the secret pattern? Campbell was a scholar of mythology. That's a lovely sort of life when you think about it. Imagine spending your days not with spreadsheets or schedules, but with the old stories. The gods and heroes of Greece, the trickster spirits of Native American tales, the Hindu epics, the Buddhist parables, the legends of the Norse, the fairy tales of half the world, the stories scratched into clay and pressed into papyrus and whispered around fires for thousands of years. That was Campbell's work, to read all of it, to hold all of it in his mind at once, and to ask a question that comes to anyone who reads widely enough in the world's stories. A simple, almost childlike question: why do they rhyme? Because they do rhyme, that's the thing that haunted him. A hero born in Mesopotamia 4,000 years ago, and a hero dreamed up in California in the 20th century, and a hero from a Japanese folktale, and a hero from a tale told by a grandmother in a village in West Africa. They keep moving through the same beats. They keep doing the same things in the same order, even when the people telling these stories had no way of ever meeting, no shared language, no contact across the oceans and the centuries. The same shape kept surfacing again and again in cultures that could not possibly have copied one another. And in 1949, Campbell put his answer to that question into a book. The book is called The Hero with 1,000 Faces. That title alone is a kind of poem, isn't it? 1,000 faces. The idea that there is one hero, just one, wearing 1,000 different masks. The same figure appearing as a Greek warrior, as a wandering Buddhist monk, as a knight, as a farm boy gazing at the twin suns of a desert planet, as a young lion. 1,000 faces, one hero underneath them all. That book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, published in 1949, became the founding text of this whole idea. It's the source. Everything that came after, Vogler's memo, the diagram on the classroom wall, the screenwriting manuals, all of it flows downstream from that single book. And in it, Campbell gave a summary, One sentence, really, that holds the entire theory the way a seed holds a tree. I want to read it to you slowly, exactly as he wrote it, because it's worth hearing in his own words. Listen. A hero ventures forth from the world of common day into a region of supernatural wonder. Fabulous forces are there encountered, and a decisive victory is won. The hero comes back from this mysterious adventure with the power to bestow boons on his fellow man. Let me say that again, even slower, because the shape of it matters, and because the rhythm of those words is itself a little like falling asleep. A hero ventures forth from the world of common day, from the ordinary, from the kitchen, the farm, the village, the world you already know, into a region of supernatural wonder, into the strange, the unknown, the place where the normal rules don't hold. Fabulous forces are there encountered, and a decisive victory is won. There's a struggle out there in the strange country, and the hero comes through it. And then, this is the part most people forget, the hero comes back from this mysterious adventure with the power to bestow boons on his fellow man, comes home, and brings something back for everyone else. That's the whole journey compressed into a breath, going out, the trial, the return. You go, you suffer, and you win. You come home changed and carrying a gift. That's it. That's the spine of, Campbell argued, nearly every great myth humanity has ever told. And notice that word he uses at the end, boons. A boon is an old word for a blessing, a gift, a benefit. The hero doesn't just go off and have an adventure for himself, for the thrill of it. The hero goes out and he comes back and he brings something useful, something healing, something needed, back to the people he left behind. The fire stolen from the gods, the cure for the sickness in the village, the wisdom that was missing, the treasure that once shared makes everyone's life a little less hard. Hold on to that. The idea of bringing the gift home because it'll come back around later, and it turns out to be the part of the whole journey that matters most, and the part our modern stories get most wrong. Now, Campbell organized all of this going out and coming home, into three great movements. 3 acts, like the 3 acts of a play, or the 3 parts of a long day, morning and afternoon and evening. And these 3 are simple enough that you can hold them in your mind even as you start to drift. Art. The first act he called departure. Sometimes separation. This is the leaving. The hero is pulled or pushed out of the ordinary world. The farm boy looks up from his chores, the call comes, and somehow, reluctantly or eagerly, the hero crosses out of the familiar and into the unknown. The separation from everything safe and known. That's the first act. Departure. The second act he called initiation. This is the deep middle of the journey, the long stretch in the strange country. This is where the trials happen, where the hero is tested again and again, where he meets the helpers and the temptations, where he descends into the darkest place and faces the thing he most fears. Initiation. The word itself means a beginning, but it's the kind of beginning you only reach by going through an ordeal. The way you're initiated into adulthood, not by a birthday, but by surviving something. That's the second act. The transformation happens here, in the dark. And the third act he called return. The coming home. Carrying the boon, the gift, the elixir, back across the threshold and into the ordinary world the hero left behind. The return. Departure. Initiation, return, going out, going through, coming home. 3 movements. Hold those 3 like 3 smooth stones in your hand. You don't have to grip them. Just let them rest there now. Here's where I want to slow down even more, because we've arrived at the door of the real secret. The thing the title promised you. The thing that makes this whole idea more than just a clever observation about stories. Because so far, everything I've told you sounds like it's about adventure, about dragons and deserts and decisive victories and fabulous forces. It sounds like it's about the outside, about things happening out there in a galaxy far away, or in the kingdom over the mountains, or in the deep dark forest. The hero goes somewhere. The hero fights something. The hero comes home. But here is the turn. Here is the quiet, strange, beautiful turn that Campbell built his whole life's work upon, and that almost everyone misses when they reduce his idea to a 12-step diagram on a wall. The dragon isn't a dragon. Say it again to yourself, soft, as you lie there. The dragon isn't a dragon. The journey isn't really happening out there at all. The desert, the forest, the underworld, the dark cave, the distant planet, the monster waiting in the deep. None of it is really about geography. None of it is really about a place you could find on a map or travel to in a ship. The outer journey, all of it, the leaving and the trials and the homecoming, is a disguise, a costume, a picture painted on the outside of something that is actually happening on the inside the hero. Inside the mind, inside, if Campbell is right, your own mind right now, even as you settle deeper into the pillow. The hero who ventures forth from the world of common day, that's a picture of something. The region of supernatural wonder, that's a picture of something too. The fabulous forces, the decisive victory, the boon brought home. Every single piece of it is a picture, an image, a symbol for a process that has nothing to do with swords or spaceships and everything to do with what happens inside a person when they grow, when they change, when they finally face the part of themselves they've spent a lifetime running from. That's the real claim. That's the thing underneath the thing. The hero's journey isn't a map of a quest across the world. It's a map of the journey you take into your own self. The monsters out there are really the monsters in here. The treasure buried in the dragon's cave is really a treasure buried in you. And the reason the same story keeps surfacing in Sumer and in Hollywood, in a grandmother's fireside tale and in a blockbuster film, isn't because everyone copied everyone else. It's because everyone, every single human being who has ever lived is running the same program on the inside. We all have the same shape of soul. We all have to make, in our own way, the same inner journey. And so we keep telling, in 1,000 different costumes, the one story that describes it. That's why he called it the monomyth, the one myth. Not because there's literally one tale and everyone plagiarized it down the centuries, but because there's one journey the human heart has to make, and all our stories are just that one journey, dressed up in different clothes, told in different tongues, set under different skies. 1,000 faces, one hero, and the hero, in the end, is you. I can feel that this is a lot to take in, and that's all right. You don't need to hold it tight. Just let it float there above you in the dark. The dragon isn't a dragon. The journey is inward. The story you've watched 100 times, the farm boy and the wise old teacher and the dark figure in the mask, was secretly, all along, telling you something about yourself. Now, a claim like that all these grand outer adventures are really disguised pictures of an inner transformation, that's a big claim. An enormous claim. And you'd be right to ask, well, where did Campbell get such an idea? It's a beautiful thought, but is it just a poetic notion he dreamed up, or did it come from somewhere real, somewhere with weight behind it? It came from somewhere. It came, in large part, from another man entirely. A man who spent his whole long life mapping the inside of the human mind the way an explorer maps an unknown continent. A man whose ideas gave Campbell the very language he needed to say that the dragon isn't a dragon, and that man's name was Carl Gustav Jung. We'll spend real time with Jung soon because he's the one who supplies the why, He's the one who explains why the outer quest is secretly an inner one, and what exactly that monster in the cave really is, and why, in the most unsettling and most fascinating part of this whole idea, the monster might be wearing a face you'd recognize, a face you see every morning in the mirror. But before we cross over to Jung, let me leave you here for a little while, resting in the doorway between the two. Let me set the pieces beside you so they're ready when we come back to them. We have the word monomyth, the one story. Lifted from a difficult dream of a novel by James Joyce, Finnegan's Wake, in 1939. We have the man, Joseph Campbell, the scholar of myths, who reached into that novel, took the word, and built his great book around it, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, 1949. We have the surprise that the famous 12-step version most people know isn't his at all, but a streamlining made decades later by a Disney story consultant named Christopher Vogler, beginning as a 7-page office memo and growing into a book called The Writer's Journey in 1992. We have Campbell's one-sentence summary, the seed that holds the whole tree, a hero who ventures forth from the world of common day into a region of supernatural wonder, wins a decisive victory, and comes back with the power to bestow boons on his fellow man. And we have his 3 great acts: departure, initiation, return, going out, going through, coming home. And then above all of it, like a lamp left burning in a window, we have the turn, the secret, the thing that makes this more than a clever pattern in old books. The dragon isn't a dragon, the journey isn't out there, it's in here. The whole grand adventure, every version of it ever told, is a disguised picture of the journey a human being makes into the deepest parts of themselves. The outer quest is the inner quest, wearing a mask. Rest with that for a moment. You don't have to do anything with it. There's no test in the morning. If everything else I've said tonight slips away from you as you sink towards sleep, and a good deal of it probably will, that's fine. That's how it should be. Let just one thing stay, if you like. Let it be that gentle, strange little idea that the stories we love, the ones we return to again and again across our whole lives, the farm boy and the lion cub and the hero pulled from his ordinary day into something vast and frightening and wonderful, are not really about anyone else at all. They are about us. They are about the journey each of us is quietly making, even here, even now, even lying still in the dark. And when we come back, we'll meet the man who explained why. We'll open the door to Carl Gustav Jung and the strange, deep country he discovered underneath all our minds, the place he called the collective unconscious, where the same ancient figures wait inside every one of us, the wise old guide, the shadowy double, the hidden other half of the soul. We'll find out what the monster in the cave really is, and we'll come, slowly and gently, to the most surprising claim of all, the one Jung whispered and Campbell carried out into the daylight of myth, that every monster in every story, the thing the hero must finally turn and face in the deepest part of the dark, is the same monster, and it is wearing your face, but not yet. For now, just breathe. Let the day you carried in here loosen its grip, finger by finger. There's nothing more to do tonight. The hero rests before the journey begins. And so can you. Let us go back then, all the way back, to where this idea was first written down. The year is 1949. A book appears, quiet at first, with a strange and beautiful title, The Hero with 1,000 Faces. The man who wrote it was named Joseph Campbell, and what he claimed inside those pages was something that sounds, at first, almost too large to be true. He said that underneath all the thousands of hero stories told by all the peoples of the earth, across every century, in every language, there lies one single story, one shape, One journey, repeated and repeated, dressed each time in different clothes, but always, underneath, the same. He gave that one story a name. He called it the monomyth. One myth. The single myth hiding inside all the others. And here is the first small surprise, the kind of thing you can let drift through you and smile at as you settle deeper into your pillow. Campbell did not invent that word, he found it. He lifted it, like a smooth stone from a riverbed, out of a novel. A famously difficult novel written by James Joyce, called Finnegan's Wake, published just 10 years earlier, in 1939. It is a book that almost no one finishes. A book made of dreams and puns and language folded over on itself until it barely behaves like language at all. And somewhere inside that great strange tangle, Joyce had set down the word monomyth, almost as a joke, almost in passing. Campbell read it, Campbell kept it, and he carried it out of that dense, sleepless book and gave it to the whole world. So the very name of the idea, the secret blueprint behind Star Wars, behind The Lion King, behind the ancient clay tablet song of Gilgamesh, came from a writer playing in the dark with words. There is something fitting in that. The one story has a borrowed name, lifted from a dream. Now here is the part where I have to gently set something straight. And it's a thing almost no one tells you, so let it land softly. If you have ever seen the hero's journey laid out, you have most likely seen it as a wheel or a list, with 12 steps marching around it. 12 neat stages. It's taped to the walls of film schools. It's pinned above the desks of screenwriters all over Hollywood. And almost everyone who points to it says, "There, that is Joseph Campbell's hero's journey." Except it isn't. Not quite. Those 12 steps were not Campbell's. Let us explore where they actually came from, because it's a lovely, ordinary little story. In the 1980s, there was a young man named Christopher Vogler working as a story consultant at the Walt Disney Studios. He had read Campbell, he loved Campbell, but Campbell's book was deep and dense and not exactly something a busy studio writer would sit and study. So Vogler did a very practical, very human thing. He sat down and wrote a memo, 7 pages, just 7, a short, clear working guide that boiled Campbell's vast idea down into 12 simple stages a screenwriter could actually use. He called it a practical guide to the hero with 1,000 faces. And that little memo did something memos almost never do. It got passed from hand to hand, from desk to desk. It traveled quietly through the offices of Hollywood, copied and shared, until it had shaped the bones of film after film. Later, Vogler grew that memo into a whole book published in 1992 called The Writer's Journey. And it is his 12 steps, Vogler's 12, not Campbell's, that the whole world now recites. So the next time someone shows you the famous 12-step wheel, you can hold a small, kind secret. That you know it began as a 7-page office note written by a man who simply wanted to help his colleagues tell better stories. But if those 12 steps are Vogler's, what were Campbell's? What did the man himself actually say? Let us go and look slowly with no hurry at all, because the real shape is simpler and I think more beautiful than the 12-spoked wheel. Campbell saw the journey in 3 great movements, 3 acts the way a day has a morning, a long middle, and an evening. He called the first one departure, the second initiation, and the third return. Departure, initiation, return. Say them slowly to yourself if you like, the way you might say the names of 3 distant towns on a road you are about to travel. The leaving, the trial, the coming home. In the departure, the hero is pulled out of ordinary life. The world of common day, Campbell called it. Something calls to them, something they often want desperately to refuse, and a guide appears and a threshold is crossed, and the old familiar world is left behind. In the initiation, the hero is deep in the strange country now, facing trials, meeting powers, being tested and broken down and remade, and in the return, the hero must come back. must carry whatever they found out there back home into the ordinary world they left. That last part, the return, Campbell believed, is the hardest of all, and it is the part nearly every modern story forgets. But that is a thread for another night. Here, let me give you Campbell's own words, just as he wrote them, because there is a slow music in them worth hearing in the dark. He summed up the whole monomyth in a single sentence, and it goes like this. A hero ventures forth from the world of common day into a region of supernatural wonder. Fabulous forces are there encountered, and a decisive victory is won. The hero comes back from this mysterious adventure with the power to bestow boons on his fellow man. Listen to that again, gently, as it settles. A hero ventures forth from the world of common day. That is the leaving, the departure, into a region of supernatural wonder where fabulous forces are encountered and a decisive victory is won. That is the initiation, the long dark middle, the trial. The hero comes back. There it is. The return. Comes back with the power to bestow boons on his fellow man. Comes back carrying a gift. Out and through and home again. That is the whole secret skeleton. Everything else, all the 12 steps and the 17 stages and the wheels and the diagrams, is just detail hung on those 3 simple bones. The leaving, the trial, the coming home. Now, here is where Campbell turns from a man cataloguing old stories into something stranger and far more interesting. Because you might be lying there thinking, well, that's a fine description of an adventure. A hero leaves home, fights a monster, wins, comes back. Of course, thousands of stories share that shape. It's just what an exciting tale looks like. But Campbell was not really talking about adventure at all. And this is the thing I most want to slip into your mind tonight, the seed I'll let take root quietly while you drift. The dragon, Campbell believed, is not a dragon. The cave the hero is afraid to enter is not really a cave. The monster waiting in the dark is not really a monster. The treasure the hero is searching for is not gold, and the far country full of supernatural wonder is not somewhere out there across the sea or out among the stars. The whole journey, the leaving and the trial, and the coming home, the entire grand outer adventure of every hero who ever lived in any story, is a disguise, a picture, a symbol. And what it is a symbol of is you, is the inside of a human being, is the quiet, lifelong, mostly invisible journey each of us is making, deep down, whether we ever notice it or not. The outer quest, Campbell was saying, is a disguised inner one. The hero travels across a strange land, but really the soul is traveling across itself. The hero faces the monster in the cave, but really a person is turning, at last, to face something hidden inside their own mind. That is why these stories grip us so. That is why we tell them again and again and never tire of them. The farm boy, the lion cub, the reluctant traveler called out into the dark. Not because we love adventure, though we do, but because somewhere underneath we know the story is about us. We feel it. The hero is making the journey we are all, secretly, slowly making ourselves. And to understand how Campbell could possibly claim such a thing, to understand what that monster in the cave really is, we have to meet the other man. The one waiting just behind Campbell, the one whose strange and beautiful map of the human soul made all of this possible. But softly. Not yet. Let that idea rest beside you for now like a small light left burning low. The dragon is not a dragon. There is nothing to solve in it tonight. Just let it stay and breathe and let yourself sink a little deeper towards sleep. His name was Carl Gustav Jung, and he was born in the summer of 1875 in a small Swiss village called Keswil, the son of a country pastor, and a mother who, by all accounts, contained worlds within her that she rarely allowed the surface to show. He was a strange child by his own telling, solitary, prone to sitting alone at the edge of things and watching. He had the feeling from very young of being two people at once, the ordinary schoolboy who walked to lessons and ate supper and answered when spoken to, and another, older figure, wiser and quieter, who observed all of it from some interior distance and was not entirely convinced that the world of daily life was the most real world there was. He wrote about this in his memoirs, late in his long life, without embarrassment. He seemed to find it simply true. Two people in one body, the outer face and the deeper one. He became a psychiatrist. He worked at the Burghölzli Psychiatric Hospital in Zurich in the early years of the 20th century, and then for a time he was close to Sigmund Freud, walking beside him, corresponding with him, being named by Freud as something like a chosen successor. And then they broke in 1912 or 1913 with the particular bitterness that comes when two people who have shared a vision disagree on something essential. Freud believed the engine of the unconscious was primarily sexual. Jung believed the unconscious was something stranger, larger, older than any individual life. He believed it reached back further than a single childhood. It went deeper than any one person's private history. He spent years after the break in something approaching a controlled unraveling. He let himself go inward deliberately. He kept notes. He drew images. He recorded dreams with the care another man might give to scientific measurements. And what he found there, in the deep interior, was not chaos and not simply old wounds. What he found were figures, shapes, recurring presences arriving in dream after dream, in patient after patient, turning up again and again in the symbols of civilizations that had never spoken to each other, never shared a library, never traded a single story across the sea. He found the old man who knew things he had no right to know. He found the terrible mother. He found the trickster who could not be trusted and could not be ignored. He found the dark twin, the shadow that moved when the light fell the wrong way. He found the same ones over and over in a Swiss factory worker's dreams, in the carvings of ancient Mexico, in the images of medieval European alchemy, in the myths of the Siberian steppe. He called these figures archetypes, and the layer of the psyche where they lived, the deep, shared foundation beneath every private mind, he called the collective unconscious. Now the word unconscious we all half know. We use it loosely to mean the parts of our minds we cannot see directly, the emotions we have not named, the memories we have stored somewhere below the threshold of attention. Freud had that. Freud's unconscious was personal. It was your buried history, your private repressions, the particular things you had pushed below the surface because they were too painful or too unacceptable to carry in the open. Jung agreed that layer existed. He called it the personal unconscious, but he said it was not the bottom. Beneath it, he said, was another layer entirely, a layer that belonged to no single person, inherited, not learned, structural like the architecture of the lungs or the pattern of the heartbeat, shared across every human being who had ever drawn breath, regardless of when or where they were born. This was the collective unconscious, a vast, dark basement underneath all of us containing the original templates of human inner life. And the contents of that basement were the archetypes. Not images exactly, Jung was careful to say, not pictures, more like invisible molds, or to use a different analogy, like river channels cut into bedrock over thousands of years. The water that flows through them takes the shape of the channel without the water, and the channel being the same thing. The archetype is the channel. The particular figure you meet in your dream or your fairy tale or your film, that is the water taking the shape. He called those specific figures archetypal images. The form behind them is universal and empty. The face it wears is local, historical, particular to your culture's dress and climate and way of naming things. But the structure beneath the face, that is the same everywhere. This is why the wise old man appears in so many stories. Not because everyone copied everyone else, not because there is one original tale that all the others borrowed from, but because the template for the wise old man is sitting in the deep basement of the human mind, waiting. When a culture needs to give shape to a story, when a dreamer lies down and their mind goes wandering, the template rises and puts on whatever costume is locally available. In ancient Greece, it wears a philosopher's robe. In a Norse saga, it wears a grey cloak and carries a staff and has one eye. In a film about a galaxy far away, it wears brown desert cloth and speaks in a particular cadence. The costume changes. The template does not. Campbell looked at Jung's map and recognized in it the engine he had been looking for. He had spent years reading myth. He had read Sumerian myth and Indian myth and the myths of the Pacific Islands and the stories of the Aztec and the Maya and the Norse and the Greek, and he had noticed, and as others had noticed before him, though we will come back to them, that the shapes kept rhyming. The hero kept leaving home. The hero kept encountering a helper at the edge of the known world. The hero kept facing something terrible in the dark. The hero kept dying in some sense and being remade. And the hero kept coming back or failing to. The rhymes were too consistent to be coincidence and too widespread to be borrowing. Some deeper explanation was required. Jung gave him that explanation. The stories rhyme, Campbell concluded, because the minds that produce them are the same mind, the same templates, sitting in the same deep basement, generating the same shapes, no matter which language the story arrives in. The outer journey of the hero is a symbolic enactment of the inner journey the psyche takes when it grows, when it meets its own darkness, when it integrates what it has hidden. The hero's journey is the mind's journey, worn as a story, like the archetype wearing its local costume. So when we ask what the roster of these figures looks like, when we ask which archetypes are doing the work inside the hero's journey, the answer requires going through them one by one, slowly, because each one is worth sitting with. The first and most central is the self. Jung used a capital S for this, and what he meant was not the everyday self, not your name, your habits, your preferences, your social history. He meant the totality, the whole integrated person. Not who you are right now, but who you are potentially, when all the fragments have been gathered and reconciled and brought into relation with each other. The self is the goal. In the story, it is what the hero is becoming. The treasure at the end of the quest, the kingdom restored, the boon brought back from the dark. These are symbols of the self. They stand for wholeness. And wholeness, Jung was careful to say, is not happiness, not comfort, not the resolution of all difficulty. It is something different, the integration of all parts of yourself, including the ones you would rather not know about. Which brings us immediately to the second archetype and the one that will concern us most, the shadow. If the self is the whole person you could become, the shadow is everything you have refused to become or refused to know that you are. It is the sum of all the parts of yourself that you have decided are unacceptable and have therefore pushed out of the light and into the dark. It begins forming very early. From childhood, we are taught by family, by school, by the unspoken rules of social life, which parts of us are welcome and which are not. The anger is not welcome. Put it away. The fear is embarrassing. Put it away. The greed, the cruelty, the longing for things you cannot name politely, the vulnerability so raw it could not survive exposure. Put it away. And we put it all in the basement. We put it in the shadow, and it does not disappear there. It accumulates. It grows, actually, in the dark, fed by everything we continue to add to it, and it looks for other faces to wear. Because we have declared it unacceptable in ourselves, we become very skilled at locating it in others. We project it outward. We see in other people, in other groups, in enemies real and imagined, exactly the qualities we have refused to acknowledge in ourselves. We hate in them what we cannot face in us. This is the monster in the cave. This is what the dragon is, not an external enemy, not a creature of scales and fire that lives in the physical world. The dragon is the shadow, the accumulated, disowned, projected interior darkness that the hero must finally turn and face. The reason the cave is so terrifying is not because of what waits there from the outside world. It is because of what waits there from inside the hero's own chest. The monster wears the hero's face, or it should, which is why the most honest versions of the story, and we will come back to specific examples as we walk the stages, always carry this unsettling quality. The hero and the villain are related. They mirror each other. Darth Vader is Luke's father. The thing Simba runs from is the guilt and grief he cannot carry. The monster is never simply other. And the work of the journey, the real psychological work that the outer adventure is encoding in its symbols, is not the defeat of the shadow. Defeat is not the goal. Jung was quite specific about this, and it matters. You cannot kill the shadow. You cannot destroy the disowned parts of yourself. Trying to destroy them is what creates villains. That is the story of what happens when a person meets their shadow and, instead of integrating it, doubles down on the refusal, projects it even harder, builds an entire identity around being opposed to everything the shadow represents. That is the tyrant. That is the person who has declared war on the basement of their own mind and is losing slowly and destructively. The goal is not to kill the dragon. It is to meet it, to turn toward it without flinching, and to look at it steadily and to say, yes, this is also me. This is part of what I am. And in that acknowledgement, something changes. The thing that fed on denial loses its power. The integration begins. That is individuation. Jung's word for the process, the hero's journey, is mapping. The word itself is not complicated. It simply means becoming a whole individual, becoming the self. It is the lifelong work of drawing back the projections, facing the interior, integrating the disowned parts until the person who exists in the world bears some honest resemblance to the full person waiting underneath. No one completes it. It is a direction, not a destination. But the journey is the thing. Now, alongside the shadow, Jung identified several other archetypes that appear regularly in the journey, and each of them deserves a moment. The Anima and the Animus are a pair. The Anima is the feminine inner figure carried unconsciously by a man. The Animus is the masculine inner figure carried unconsciously by a woman. Jung believed that every human psyche contains qualities of both what culture codes as masculine and what culture codes as feminine, and that these qualities tend to be lived consciously on one side and pushed unconsciously to the other. A man who has been raised to express only strength and reason carries an inner feminine, sensitivity, receptivity, relational knowing that he has pushed below the surface. That interior figure, unacknowledged and unintegrated, tends to appear in his life projected outward, which is part of why people fall in love in the irrational, consuming way they sometimes do. They are meeting their own interior projected onto another face. In the story, the Anima appears as the goddess, the beloved, the enchantress, the dangerous woman, the sacred feminine. In Campbell, she occupies the stage called Meeting with the Goddess, which is explicitly not about romance in the ordinary sense. It is about the hero's confrontation with the interior feminine, which in a man's psyche is the part of him that knows things differently than reason alone can know them, the part that feels the world rather than merely analyzing it. Meeting her is terrifying and necessary. It is another form of the same integration work. The wise old man is simpler to name if not to encounter. He is the mentor. He is the figure who appears at the threshold, who knows the territory the hero does not, who offers the tool or the word or the guidance that makes the crossing possible. In Jung's inner landscape, he represents the part of the psyche that has already lived more than the conscious ego knows. The accumulated wisdom sitting in the deep interior, available if the ego is humble enough to stop and listen. Merlin, Gandalf, Obi-Wan Kenobi, the old priest, the grandmother who has survived everything. They are all this figure wearing different clothes. And what they all ultimately represent is the hero's own potential for depth and knowledge, showing itself from the outside before the hero is ready to claim it from the inside. The mother archetype appears in two faces, as so many of Jung's archetypes do, because the psyche is not tidy and its images carry contradictory qualities simultaneously. The nourishing mother, protective, generative, the source, and the terrible mother, consuming, devouring, the one who will not let the child leave, or the one who swallows entirely. Both are real. Both appear in myth constantly. Demeter and Kali, the fairy godmother and the wicked stepmother, the warm home left behind and the island of Circe that turns travelers into animals, the great sea both carries the hero forward and can swallow the hero whole. The ambivalence is the point. The source of life is also the thing you must separate from, must individuate from, in order to become yourself. And then there is the trickster, who is perhaps the most interesting of them all and the one who resists being held down longest. The trickster is not the villain and not the hero. He is the disruptor, the one who breaks the rules before the rules were known to be too small. He is chaos in service of something that doesn't know it needs liberating. Loki, Coyote, Anansi the spider. Hermes, who carries messages between worlds and cannot be entirely trusted with any of them. In the story, the trickster is often the unexpected helper, the fool who knows more than the king, the seemingly unreliable companion who turns out to be essential. He represents the part of the psyche that cannot be domesticated, that refuses the structures the persona has carefully constructed, that keeps showing up at the wrong moment with an inconvenient truth. The ego finds him maddening. The self needs him desperately. Which brings us to the persona, Jung's name for the social mask. The face we show the world, not a lie exactly, but not the whole truth either. Every person maintains one, necessarily, the version of yourself that is legible in social context, that fits into a role, that answers to your name and performs your function. The danger is not the persona itself. The danger is when you lose track of the fact that it is a mask, when you begin to believe the persona is the whole person. That is the moment the shadow grows. Everything that cannot fit the mask gets pushed into the basement, and the distance between who you appear to be and who you actually are becomes the measure of the darkness waiting in the cave. So now we have the roster, sitting in their places, the self, the goal, the shadow, the opponent who turns out to be interior, the anima and animus, the interior, opposite that must be met, the wise old man, the wisdom larger than the conscious ego, the mother in her double face, nourishing and terrible, the trickster, the disruptor at the threshold, and the persona, the mask that must be distinguished from the face beneath it. These are not characters in a story, they are templates in the basement. They rise up into stories because stories are how the human mind has always processed the interior landscape. The story is the mind looking at itself sideways because looking at it directly is too much. The monster is more bearable than the truth of what the monster represents at first. The story gives us a container. And then if the story is doing its real work, it slowly leads us back inward, back to the truth, back to the recognition that the whole adventure was always happening inside. Let all of that breathe for a moment. There is nothing to memorize tonight, nothing to carry forward as a list. Just let the images sit, the figure in the cave wearing the hero's face, the old one who knows more than reason, the interior opposite waiting to be met, the mask that is not the whole face, the disruptor who cannot be tamed. Let them rest beside you in the dark. Take a slow breath in and let it out slowly. And now, a question, one that perhaps you are already half asking. We have these templates, we have this deep basement, these inherited molds. We have Jung's claim that they are universal. But is that actually provable, or is it simply a beautiful and convenient story? Can we trust this? How do we know that the costume is local, but the form beneath it is genuinely shared? That it is not simply that all cultures have old wise figures because all cultures have old people, that it is not simply coincidence, that it is not simply the result of stories traveling on trade routes and in the holds of ships. This is where the distinction Jung drew between the archetype itself and the archetypal image becomes not just philosophical, but essential, because it is the only way the claim survives scrutiny. The archetype, the form itself, is, by Jung's definition, impossible to see directly. It is structural. It is the channel cut in bedrock, not the water. You cannot hold an archetype in your hands. You cannot point to it. What you can point to is the image, the particular figure or event or symbol that the archetype generates in a specific culture and time. The hero who defeats the dragon in Norse myth. The hero who descends to the underworld in the Greek tradition. The hero who fasts in the wilderness in the Hebrew scripture. These are three different archetypal images wearing three different local costumes of culture and climate and theological context. But the structural movement beneath all three, the separation from the ordinary world, the trial in the dark, the return changed, that movement is the archetype. The invisible channel that all the different waters are following. And the reason this matters, the reason it saves Jung's claim from being merely sentimental, is that it explains the variation. If archetypes were images, if the template said hero must fight a dragon specifically, then every culture would need to have dragons and they don't. But if the template says hero must confront the embodied inner darkness, then every culture dresses that darkness in whatever frightens them most locally. For a people of the sea, the darkness is a sea monster. For a people of the desert, it is the howling wilderness inhabited by demons. For a culture that fears its own imperial violence, it is a fallen angel who was once the most beautiful of heaven. The template generates variation. The channel determines the shape of the water, but not its color, not its temperature, not the particular stones it flows over on its way. This is why the same skeleton wears so many different faces across the world's stories, and why it still rhymes across all of them. The wise old man in the Norse tradition has one eye and crows on his shoulders, and deliberately gives terrible advice sometimes because he is also the trickster, that particular culture having fused two templates together in one figure. An interesting and significant fact about Norse psychology. The wise old man in the early Buddhist tradition is most often the Buddha himself, calm and direct and piercing, pointing at the nature of mind rather than offering a sword or a spell. The wise old man in a 20th century science fiction film carries a lightsaber and dies so that the hero can internalize the wisdom rather than keep receiving it from outside. Which is, if you think about it, exactly what individuation requires. The wisdom can only live in an exterior mentor figure for so long. At some point the hero has to die, and the hero has to integrate it, which is what Obi-Wan's death actually is, symbolically. Not a plot convenience, an inner event. The moment the wisdom stops being an old man you can turn to and starts being something you carry. But we are moving into the stages of the journey now, and that is the territory of what comes next. For this moment, let the architecture sit. Let Jung's great sorting, the basement, the templates, the costumes, the distinction between the form and the face, let it rest with you. The thesis that Campbell built on this foundation is, when you understand the foundation both simpler and stranger than it first appears. He was not saying that all stories are alike in a superficial sense, not saying that you can reduce everything to the same 12-point checklist and tick boxes. He was saying something deeper and more unsettling. He was saying that the human mind, no matter when or where it finds itself, generates the same symbolic drama because it is facing the same interior landscape, the same darkness in the same basement, the same work to be done, the same fragmented parts waiting to be gathered, the same journey in the end available to every person who was ever born, because every person who was ever born is carrying the same architecture inside. The dragon is the shadow. The treasure is the self. The cave is the interior of your own mind, and every story that sends a hero into it is, underneath its dragons and its deserts and its galaxies, gently, persistently asking you to consider making that same journey yourself. Not tonight, not as a task or an obligation or a program to be completed, but as a direction, a leaning, a turning slowly in the dark toward what has been waiting there, unnamed, for a long time. That is what the hero's journey is. That is what it has always been. A map of the inner life worn as a story, because stories are how we have always been able to look at things that would otherwise be too large and too close to see clearly. And now that we have the map and the basement and the roster of figures that populate the deep interior, we can begin to walk the journey itself. We can take Campbell's stages, the real ones, all 17 of them, not the shortened list of 12 that came later from a different hand, and see what each one actually means, what it is asking of the hero psychologically, and where you might recognize it from your own life. Worn perhaps not as a dragon or a threshold or a cave, but as a morning you did not want to get up, as a door you kept finding reasons not to walk through, as something you have been carrying for a long time in the dark, unnamed, waiting for you to turn and look at it. But we are not quite there yet. We are still in the architecture, still in the deep place where the templates live, where the old man and the shadow and the interior opposite are sitting in the dark in their incomplete forms, waiting for a story to fill them out. And there is one more thing worth sitting with before we begin to walk, which is this. Jung did not believe that every person is consciously making this journey. He believed that most people are not. He believed that the unconscious operates on its own schedule, pursuing the integration it needs through symptoms and projections and moods and compulsions, through the things we cannot stop doing, the people we cannot stop seeing in a certain light, the situations we keep recreating even when we know better. The journey happens whether we choose it or not. The question is only whether we make it consciously, with some awareness of what is being asked of us, or unconsciously, driven through the same terrain without a map, recognizing nothing, understanding nothing, arriving at the end, if we arrive at the end, without knowing where we have been. The stories, Jung suggested, are one of the maps, not instruction manuals, not prescriptions, maps, showing that others have gone this way before, that the shadow has been faced before and survived, that the old man is worth listening to, that the interior opposite is not a threat, but a completion, that what waits in the cave is not the end of you, but a truer version of you, that the ordinary ego is simply not yet large enough to contain. This is why Campbell was moved by these stories to his core, not because they were entertaining, though they are, not because they are culturally important, though they are that too, but because, if you read them the way he read them as Jung's templates, wearing their local costumes, they become something close to a record of the human psyche's own wisdom about itself. Every culture, independently, found its way to the same symbolic map. The hero must leave. The hero must face the darkness. The hero must integrate what is found there. The hero must return. And if the map keeps appearing everywhere, in every time, drawn by people who never knew each other, then perhaps, Campbell thought, it is not just a map for heroes, perhaps it is a map for everyone. Let that rest now. Let it settle like something settling slowly in deep water, without urgency, without demand. The figure in the cave is not waiting impatiently. The old man at the threshold is patient. The journey does not require you to understand everything tonight, or to do anything with it, or to carry it anywhere. It only asks, very gently, that you know it is there. Take a slow breath in. Hold it for just a moment. And let it go. When you are ready, we will continue and begin to walk the stages themselves one by one in the dark with no hurry at all. So, let us begin to walk. Campbell laid out 17 stages in all. 17. Not 12, as the Hollywood version would have you believe, but 17 grouped into 3 acts, like 3 long exhalations. Departure, initiation, return. And tonight we are going to move through the first of those acts slowly, the way you might walk a path you have never walked before, noticing things at the edges, letting the map become something felt rather than memorized. The first stage is the one that starts everything. Campbell called it the call to adventure. It sounds simple, it sounds almost obvious. Of course the hero gets called, of course something happens that sets the story in motion. But Campbell was not interested in the plot mechanism. He was not writing a screenwriter's handbook. He was asking a different question entirely. He was asking, what is it really that the call is calling you away from? And what is it calling you toward? The world of common day, he said, that is where you begin. The ordinary world, the known, the settled, the small. And this is important because the ordinary world is not presented as evil in the myth. It is not a bad place, it is simply limited. It is the egg. And at a certain point, and Campbell thought this happened to people not just in stories but in actual lives, at a certain point the egg is not big enough anymore. Something cracks. Something stirs. A voice you did not expect, a loss you could not have predicted, a stranger at the door, a dream that doesn't leave when morning comes. Moses was tending sheep in the desert of Midian. He had been doing it for years. He was a man with a past he had left behind, an Egyptian court, a violent act, a long flight into exile. He was settled in his way. He had a wife. He had a father-in-law. He had his flock. And then a bush burned without burning up. That is the call to adventure, not a trumpet, not an angel with a list. A bush on fire that does not go out, in a place so ordinary he walked past it every day and had never seen it do anything unusual at all. Luke Skywalker is fixing a droid in the desert. Frodo Baggins is at a birthday party. Neo is going to work and coming home and going to sleep, restless and unhappy in a way he cannot name. The call does not always arrive in fire. Sometimes it comes as a restlessness you cannot explain. Sometimes it comes as something breaking that you thought would hold forever. Sometimes it comes in the middle of the most ordinary Tuesday afternoon that ever existed, and it doesn't announce itself as anything important at all. But here is what Campbell noticed, and here is what makes this stage philosophically interesting rather than just dramatically useful. The call is almost never accepted right away. The second stage is the refusal of the call, and this one, Grandpa thinks, is the most honest stage of all. Moses, standing before a burning bush that is speaking to him in the voice of God, argues. He says he is not the right man. He says no one will believe him. He says he does not speak well. He comes up with 4 separate objections. 4. The bush is literally on fire and speaking, and Moses is standing there saying, "Perhaps you could find someone else." Luke Skywalker says he has to help his uncle with the harvest. Frodo says he wishes it need not have happened in his time. Neo, offered the red pill and the blue pill, hesitates. Campbell was deeply moved by the refusal. He did not treat it as a character flaw. He treated it as a psychological truth. Because what the refusal really is, he said, is the ego clinging to its shape. The ego knows who it is in the ordinary world. It has a name there, a role, a way of being recognized. The unknown on the other side of the threshold offers none of that. The unknown is, by definition, a place where the old self cannot survive intact. And the ego knows this. This is why the refusal is so universal. It is not cowardice, or not only that, it is the entirely reasonable response of a self that knows, at some level, that crossing over will mean becoming someone it does not yet know how to be. The caterpillar, if it could see what the chrysalis actually does to it, would probably refuse the call too. There is a very human sound to all of these refusals if you listen for it. Moses does not say he is afraid of Pharaoh. He says he is not eloquent. He finds the smallest, most personal objection he can. Because the real fear is not the task out there. The real fear is the transformation in here. The fear of the call is almost always a fear of self-dissolution, of not knowing who you will be on the other side. And the myths allow this. They do not shame the refusal. They observe it. They say, yes, of course you are afraid. Of course you want to stay. The ordinary world is known, and the known is safe, and safety is not nothing. But the call, in the myths, does not go away just because you refuse it. It waits. It returns in new forms. The burning bush keeps burning. The droid keeps projecting its message. The restlessness doesn't settle, because whatever psychological necessity the journey represents cannot be indefinitely postponed. Sooner or later, something shifts. And the third stage arrives. Campbell called it supernatural aid, the appearance of the mentor figure. Now, in the dossier of Jungian archetypes we spent time with before, you met the wise old man, the Senex, the figure who appears at the liminal edge, at the boundary between the known and the unknown, and who carries something the hero does not yet have. Not the strength to make the crossing, not the courage, something subtler, the right question, the right object, the permission to go. Merlin, Gandalf, Obi-Wan Kenobi, the fairy godmother at the threshold of the ball, the old woman in the forest who gives the third son the magical tablecloth, the burning bush itself, you could argue, in the Moses story, the voice that says, "Not I will do it for you, but I will be with you." Campbell was careful about what the mentor actually gives. It is almost never the ability to win. The magic sword is almost always given before the hero knows what it is for. The mentor's gift is permission and equipping, not victory. Obi-Wan does not tell Luke how to destroy the Death Star. He gives him a lightsaber. He tells him about the Force. He tells him that his father was a good man. He plants something in Luke that Luke himself will have to grow into. And then in every version of this story, the mentor steps back, because the journey cannot be made on behalf of the hero. It can only be made by them. This is important enough to say twice. The mentor never completes the journey for the hero. The wise old man is not the protagonist. He is the figure who makes the crossing possible and then stands at the gate and watches, because what is on the other side can only be faced alone. Moses' father-in-law Jethro sends him back toward Egypt. Obi-Wan says the Force will be with you always and then later will die so that Luke can continue without him. Gandalf falls into shadow in the mines of Moria before the Fellowship is through the first half of the journey. Dumbledore dies. Mufasa dies. The mentor's death is not a tragedy in the myth. It is a promotion. It is the moment the hero stops being an apprentice and begins to be themselves. Which brings us to the fourth stage, crossing the first threshold. Campbell described the threshold as a real boundary in the symbolic geography of the myth. On one side, the known world, the ordinary. On the other, what Campbell called the region of supernatural wonder, the world where the rules are different, where time moves strangely, where the self is no longer protected by familiarity, where the old identity has no purchase. And guarding this boundary is a threshold guardian. The guardian is not the villain. That is a crucial distinction. The villain comes later, deeper in the heart of the unknown. The threshold guardian is something else, a figure who tests whether the hero is truly ready, or who blocks passage not out of malice but as a function. The guardian is, Campbell thought, the last defensive structure of the known world, the last test of commitment. Sometimes the guardian is defeated, sometimes the guardian is appeased, sometimes the guardian is bypassed, or befriended, or revealed to be an ally wearing an intimidating face. In The Wizard of Oz, the doorkeeper of the Emerald City starts as a blocker and becomes a guide. In the myths of ancient Sumer, the hero Gilgamesh had to pass the scorpion men who guarded the tunnels beneath the mountains, beings whose very gaze could kill. He does not fight them. He tells them where he is going and why, and they let him pass. The crossing itself is often marked, in the myths, by a kind of violence, not necessarily physical, though often that too, but a violence to the old self, a leaving behind of what was. You cross the threshold and the ordinary world is no longer visible behind you. This is followed immediately by the fifth stage, and the one Campbell gave perhaps the strangest name, the belly of the whale. Take a moment with that image. A belly, warm, dark, enclosing. The inside of something enormous that has swallowed you whole. Jonah, of course, the prophet who ran from the call, boarded a ship going the wrong direction, was thrown overboard in a storm, and was swallowed by a great fish. 3 days in the dark, in the belly of a creature that is simultaneously death and protection, before being cast back up onto the shore and told again to go to Nineveh. Campbell read this not as a fish story. He read it as a diagram. The belly of the whale is the symbolic death of the old self. The crossing of the threshold plunges you into a space so radically other that who you were before cannot survive it. You are digested. The old shape dissolves. What you were, your certainties, your roles, your ordinary identity, must be given up before the transformation can begin. It is not pleasant. It is not supposed to be pleasant. It is death, or the symbolic cousin of death, and Campbell thought this was precisely why so many initiatory rituals across cultures involve a symbolic dying. The Australian Aboriginal walkabout, the vision quest of the Lakota, the Christian baptism that invokes being buried with Christ, the long dark tunnel in near-death accounts that so many people across cultures independently describe. The structure is the same. You go under, you are unmade, you resurface as someone the old self could not have contained. Luke Skywalker, separated from Han and Leia, falls into the trash compactor of the Death Star, literally trapped in a closing, crushing, dark enclosure with a monster in the water below. It is a perfectly staged belly of the whale, and you can tell that whoever staged it had some sense of the archetype, consciously or not, because the symbolism is almost too neat. The crushing walls, the dark water, the monster, the near suffocation before rescue. The cave in Luke's later Jedi training, the one Yoda points to and says, "What is in there?" And Luke says, "Only what you take with you," is another belly. This one even more explicitly psychological. Luke enters and meets Darth Vader, and when he cuts off Vader's head, the helmet breaks open to reveal Luke's own face. Only what you take with you. The monster wears your face. This is the Jungian overlay made almost unbearably clear. The cave is the unconscious. The figure in the cave is the shadow. And the shadow is not a foreign enemy. It is the unacknowledged half of the self. Let us pause there for a moment in that image, because it is worth staying with. A young man walks into a dark cave. He carries a sword. He is afraid, and he should be. But the thing waiting in the cave, the thing he must face if he is to become whatever he is meant to become, is wearing his face. This is what Jung called individuation, rendered as a moment in a film about space. The belly of the whale is where you meet it. Take a slow, easy breath. There is no hurry. The cave is patient. The story holds. Now, once through the belly, once the old self has been symbolically consumed and expelled, the hero enters the second act, the long middle of the journey. Campbell called it initiation. And the first great stage of this act is the one that names the texture of the whole middle section, the road of trials, a series of tests, a succession of encounters, ordeals, and impossible tasks. Campbell noted that the hero does not pass these trials alone. Helpers arrive, companions join, talismans and gifts prove their use. The road of trials is the place where the hero learns through suffering and effort and repeated failure and occasional grace what they are actually capable of. It is the training ground, except that it is also real. The tests in the myths are not practice, they are the thing itself. Odysseus on his long voyage home, island after island, each one a new ordeal. Heracles and his 12 labors. The 3 tasks the prince must complete to win the princess. Tasks that, in the original fairy tales, always involve either cleverness or kindness rather than brute strength, and that always teach something about the world the hero had not understood before. In the Jewish tradition, the 40 years in the wilderness between Egypt and the Promised Land are a road of trials. The Israelites are tested, and they fail frequently, and they circle back, and they are tested again, because the people who left Egypt could not have entered the Promised Land. A generation had to be born in the wilderness first, a generation that did not remember slavery as their only reality. The trials transform. That is their function. They are not obstacles placed between you and the goal. They are the mechanism by which you become the person capable of reaching the goal. And partway through the road of trials, 2 more stages appear. And these are the ones Campbell described most psychologically, the ones most likely to be misread if you come to them expecting plot rather than symbol. The 6th and 7th stages of the initiation, meeting with the goddess and the woman as temptress. And I want to be careful here because these names can be misleading if you read them too literally, and Campbell himself was not always as careful as he might have been. In the structural sense, the meeting with the goddess is the encounter with what is deepest and most whole in the journey. Not literally a woman, not literally a love story, though the myths often stage it as one. It is, in the Jungian reading, the encounter with the Anima, the inner feminine, in a masculine-identified psyche, the interior soul image that carries qualities of relatedness, depth, intuition, and connectedness that the heroic, action-oriented, outward-facing ego typically suppresses. The hero on the road of trials has been moving outward, doing, acting, conquering. The meeting with the goddess is the moment where all of that stops and something softer, deeper, and more complete is encountered. Odysseus with Calypso, Psyche and Eros, Dante and Beatrice, who guides him through paradise, not through the underworld, notice, which is the masculine guide, Virgil's domain, but through the spheres of light. It is a meeting with a dimension of the self that the ordinary hero, trained to action and achievement and forward motion, does not know how to carry. It is a meeting with love in the deepest sense of that word, not sentiment, not romance in the greeting card sense, but the recognition of a wholeness that includes what the ego had to set aside to become efficient. Campbell said, "The goddess is the world. To be loved by the goddess is to be loved by the universe. And to meet the goddess is to learn that the universe is not the enemy." This matters because the heroic mode, the mode of the warrior, the problem solver, the achiever, is fundamentally set against the world. It treats reality as something to be overcome, defeated, transformed. The meeting with the goddess is the first introduction to the possibility that the world does not need to be conquered, that it might be sufficient. The woman as temptress stage is the shadow side of this, and it is the stage most likely to be misread in a culturally reductive way. Campbell was a product of his time, and these names carry some of that weight, but read symbolically, which is how he insisted they be read. The temptress is not a woman and not a seduction. The temptress is the lure of stopping. The danger at the midpoint of the journey is not failure, it is comfort. It is finding something good enough on the road and staying there because the road has become more real to you than the destination, and because what waits ahead is difficult and what you have found here is warm. Odysseus and Circe, the hero who lingers too long in an enchanted garden, the legend of the lotus eaters, those gentle people who offer you food that makes you forget you are trying to get home. The temptation is not evil, that is the point. If it were clearly evil, it would be easy to resist. The temptation is something genuinely good, genuinely pleasurable, genuinely comfortable, but incomplete. A partial arrival mistaken for the whole one. A halfway point taken for the destination. In life, you might recognize this as the good job that is not quite the right one, the relationship that is warm but not alive, the comfortable plateau that the deeper self knows is not the peak, but is so much easier to stay on than to climb past. The road of trials, the meeting with the goddess, the woman as temptress, and now the eighth stage, the one Campbell placed at the heart of the entire structure, atonement with the Father. This is the climax of the initiation, and it may be the stage that requires the most careful translation. The Father in the myth is not necessarily the hero's biological parent. It is the symbolic representation of the source of power in the universe, the highest authority, the deepest law. In the myths, this figure is Zeus, Yahweh, the great judge, the cosmic king. It can be experienced as terrifying, as arbitrary, as crushing in its demands. And the hero must face this figure. The word atonement is worth sitting with. At one meant to become one with. The hero who makes the atonement with the Father is not the hero who defeats the Father or placates the Father or earns the Father's approval through sufficient achievement. It is the hero who comes to understand the Father, who reaches a level of being at which the apparent opposition between hero and source dissolves. Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader. This is the mythic relationship, the Father who has become the villain, the authority that has been corrupted or was always both terrifying and related to you in ways you did not understand when the journey began, and Luke's resolution of this relationship is not the defeat of his father. It is the rescue of what is still human inside the villain. It is the recognition that Darth Vader and Anakin Skywalker are the same person, and that the love between father and son is stronger than the dark side that armor him. That is atonement, not victory, reconciliation, integration. Campbell found this same structure in the myths of so many cultures: the son who must face the father god, the initiate who must stand before the ruler of the underworld, the moment in every heroic story where the hero is no longer simply fighting something outside, but is being asked at the deepest level to recognize their own relationship to the source of everything: authority, mortality, the law, the limits of the self. In the psychological reading, the father is the archetype of law and order and the structure of reality. The hero who has been through the belly of the whale, through the road of trials, through the meeting with the deepest self, is now ready to encounter that structure, not as a threat to be defeated, but as a reality to be understood, not a cage, a container, and the recognition of the container as something one can live inside with full awareness. That is the atonement. Following atonement comes apotheosis, the word itself Greek for the elevation of a mortal to divine status, the moment of greatest illumination. The hero, having integrated the shadow, having met the inner feminine, having reconciled with the father, stands for a moment in something like wholeness. It is brief in the myths. It is the peak of the mountain before the descent, and then the ninth and final stage of the initiation, the ultimate boon, the treasure, the grail, the elixir, the stone of wisdom, the fire stolen from the gods, whatever the hero set out to find. Campbell was not interested in the object itself. He was interested in what the object represents. The boon, in the symbolic reading, is always something that will benefit not just the hero, but the community. The medicine that heals the sick, the fire that warms the cold, the revelation that answers the people's deepest question. And this is where the story takes the turn that Campbell thought modern audiences consistently miss. The boon is not the ending. Getting the treasure is not the destination. The hero must take it home. Now, before we walk into the return, which is its own long act and comes next, let us pause for a moment inside the myth and the movie, because this is the right place to name the bridge, the living bridge between Campbell's academic work and the films that would bring the monomyth into the living rooms and cinemas of the modern world, George Lucas. In the early 1970s, a young filmmaker was working on a project that would become Star Wars. He was struggling. He had ideas, images, feelings about what the story should feel like, but he did not yet have a structure that could hold all of it together. He had written drafts and the drafts were not working. He picked up The Hero with 1,000 Faces. What he found there was not a plot formula, it was not a checklist, it was something more like a resonance, a description in mythological and psychological terms of exactly the emotional journey he had been trying to construct by instinct. The stages Campbell had named corresponded to the stages he had been feeling his way toward in the dark. Lucas later said that Campbell's book was crucial in giving shape to what he was reaching for. He called Campbell my Yoda, not casually, with genuine affection and gratitude. And later, after the films had been made, after the trilogy was complete, and the world had watched Luke Skywalker refuse the call on Tatooine and cross the threshold into the wider galaxy and descend into the belly of the whale in the trash compactor of the Death Star and face the road of trials and meet his goddess and face his father and approach the ultimate boon. After all of that, Lucas invited Campbell to Skywalker Ranch. They sat together and watched the films. And Campbell was moved. He saw what he had described in academic language made breathing and kinetic and felt. He saw the mythic patterns he had spent his professional life illuminating made incarnate in a story that had reached hundreds of millions of people who had never heard of the monomyth and never would, but who felt something true in it that they couldn't explain. Campbell understood why they felt it. Because the pattern is not in the story, it is in the people watching the story. The films work the way myths work, not because they follow a formula, but because they are built from the same material the psyche is built from. They speak the language the collective unconscious already knows. Bill Moyers, the journalist and documentary filmmaker, had been in conversation with Campbell for years. He knew that something was needed to bring Campbell's ideas to a wider audience, and in 1988, a year after Campbell's death in October of 1987, a 6-part documentary series aired on PBS, The Power of Myth. The conversations had been filmed partly at Skywalker Ranch, and they moved between ancient myth and modern film with the ease of someone who had spent a lifetime seeing that the distance between them was, at the level Campbell was working at, not very great at all. The series became a cultural event. It cemented in the public imagination the connection between the monomyth and Star Wars and the claim that the old stories and the new ones were drawing from the same well. Campbell had died before it aired, but the version of him the series captured, warm, erudite, delighted by his own material, capable of talking about a Sumerian deity and a scene from a George Lucas film in the same breath without either suffering for the comparison, that version of him became enormously influential. And in the corporate heart of the entertainment industry, the influence was felt in very specific ways. Christopher Vogler had been working as a story consultant at Disney. He had read Campbell, had been moved by the same resonances Lucas described, and he wrote something practical, a 7-page internal memo distilling the monomyth into 12 stages useful for screenwriters. The memo circulated. It found an audience far beyond the walls of Disney. It was copied and passed around and became, in Hollywood, something of a secret primer. Vogler later expanded the memo into a book, The Writer's Journey, published in 1992. And the 12-stage version of the hero's journey that you have almost certainly encountered, if you have spent any time thinking about story structure. That version is Vogler's, not Campbell's 17, not the stages I have been walking with you tonight, with their strange names and their psychological depths. Vogler's cleaner, more practical, more Hollywood useful map, and one of the films most explicitly shaped by this Vogler via Campbell framework, a film that Disney has openly discussed in terms of mythic structure, is The Lion King. Think through it. Simba lives in a known world, a place of plenty and sunlight and a loving father. His call to adventure is the shadow that falls over that world. Scar's machinations, Mufasa's death, Simba's exile. His refusal is his years in the jungle, the deliberate forgetting, the life lived in the warm belly of distraction with Timon and Pumbaa, the Hakuna Matata philosophy that is, structurally, the woman as temptress in its most sympathetic and sad form. Not evil, not a seduction to vice, a seduction to forgetting, to the half-life of a life not fully lived. The call returns in the vision of Mufasa. The father's voice and image appearing in the sky, calling Simba back to who he is. Remember who you are. This is the atonement with the father rendered as a vision of the dead father calling back the son who ran away. The emotional weight of that scene is the emotional weight of Campbell's stage, transferred without loss across the translation from academic template to animated film. And an entire generation of children felt something in that moment, felt it in the chest, felt it even without understanding what they were feeling. Because the pattern being invoked is not the property of the film. It is preloaded in the psyche that is watching. The road of trials returns Simba to the Pride Lands. The confrontation with Scar is the confrontation with the shadow, Scar, who is always, in some reading, the dark version of Simba's own potential. The one who chose power over love, resentment over responsibility, the long, slow corruption of everything he touches over the difficulty of becoming who he was meant to be. Simba defeats Scar and claims the rock. He stands on Pride Rock and roars. He has brought the boon home. Now. Grandpa wants to be honest with you here, in the warm and the quiet, because honesty is part of what makes any of this worth your time. The Lucas Campbell Disney Vogler bridge is real, and it is genuinely significant, and it is not the whole story. The monomyth did not invent good storytelling. Good storytelling was already happening everywhere, for the entirety of human history, often by people who had never heard of Campbell and never would. The framework is a description of something that was already occurring, not a prescription that caused it to occur. And there are stories, many of them, important ones, profound ones, that don't fit. Tragedies don't return. Oedipus Rex does not come back with a boon. Hamlet does not integrate his shadow and become master of two worlds. Medea does not reconcile with the source of power in the universe. In the great tragedies, the journey is attempted and fails, or succeeds at a cost so total that success is barely the right word, or the hero is destroyed by the very thing they sought to find. Greek tragedy, Japanese no drama, the great novels of psychological realism. These are not failed heroes' journeys. They are different shapes entirely, different maps. And there is the question of whose journey the monomyth describes, whose inner program it is running. But that, for tonight, is a question for the next part of the walk, because what we have done in this section of the journey is something worth pausing over before we continue. We have walked from the call with Moses and his burning bush, through the refusal with Luke and Frodo and Neo making their small, honest human objections. We have met the mentor, the wise old man who appears at the threshold and gives you just enough to begin. We have crossed the first threshold into the strange country, past the guardian who tests your commitment, and descended into the belly of the whale, that warm and terrifying darkness where the old self is unmade so the new one can begin. We have walked the road of trials, which is the long middle of every real transformation. We have met the goddess, which is to say, the deep interior self that knows how to receive as well as to achieve. We have stood at the edge of the temptation to stop halfway, to call a partial life the whole one. We have faced the Father, which is to say, the deepest structure of reality, and found that atonement, at one ment, is possible. We have glimpsed for a moment what wholeness feels like, and we have walked with George Lucas and Joseph Campbell and Bill Moyers through the improbable moment when a scholar's reading of Sumerian tablets became the structural spine of a film that made an entire planet feel something they couldn't quite name. The monomyth is not a story about heroes. That is the thing that becomes clearer the longer you sit with it. It is a story about transformation, about the necessity of leaving the known, about the truth that you cannot become who you are capable of being without first becoming smaller than you thought you were, without the belly, without the cave, without the face-to-face with the thing that wears your own face in the dark. The dragon is not out there. You knew that, I think, even before tonight. You have probably felt it. The thing you are most afraid of in your own life, the obstacle that seems most external, most difficult, most other. There is usually, somewhere underneath the fear, the faintest suspicion that it knows your name, that it is, in some way you don't quite have language for yet, related to you. Campbell's whole life's work was the attempt to give people language for that. And the reason the same story keeps appearing in every culture, in every century, from the Epic of Gilgamesh to a George Lucas production at Skywalker Ranch, is not because all storytellers are copying each other. It is because they are all drawing on the same source, not a narrative tradition, a human one. The source is the psyche itself, and the psyche knows the shape of its own transformation, the way a river knows the shape of the valley it needs to carve. It does not need to be told. It already knows. Let that settle now. Let it sit with you in the dark, unhurried and undemanding, the way a good story settles when you are not trying to hold it, but simply allowing it to be there, the way you allow warmth to be there, or quiet, or the weight of your own body resting. The road of trials goes on. There are more stages ahead. The return, which Campbell said is the hardest and most skipped part of all, the part that modern stories most often leave unfinished. There is the question of where this map comes from and who it fits, and where its edges are, and what happens when someone tries to walk it and finds the map does not quite match their terrain. All of that is still ahead, but for now, take a breath, let the images rest. The burning bush, the cave with the face inside it, the old man at the threshold who hands you something you don't yet understand, the long road through the strange country, the moment of meeting something deep and interior that the ordinary self had been too busy to find. The Father, who is also the law, who is also the source, who can be, this is the hard and surprising word, reconciled with. Luke on Pride Rock. Simba in the sky, hearing his father's voice. Jonah on the shore. They all came through, and the question the next stretch of the journey will ask is the one that Campbell thought mattered most of all. Having come through, what do you do with what you found? So let us begin there. Let us begin with the question underneath the question. Where does the pattern itself come from? Not from Campbell's mind alone, not from a single man sitting with 1,000 myths and noticing they rhymed. The pattern is older than Campbell, older than Jung, older than anyone who ever tried to name it. And if you trace it backward far enough, you arrive somewhere surprising. You arrive at a man named Arnold van Gennep. Van Gennep was a French ethnographer, a careful and methodical scholar who spent years in the early 20th century studying something nobody had studied in quite this way before: the rituals by which human communities mark the passage from one stage of life to another. The ceremonies for birth and naming, the ceremonies for coming of age, the ceremonies for marriage, for death, for the crossing of a border from one village's territory into another's. He gathered these from everywhere he could reach, from cultures across Africa and Asia, and the Americas and Europe. And in 1909 he published a book called The Rites of Passage. And what he found inside all of those ceremonies, beneath all of their different costumes and symbols and local details, was a single three-part architecture: separation, transition, incorporation. First, the initiate is removed from their ordinary social world, taken from their family, their role, their comfortable belonging, stripped of what they were. This is the separation. Then they enter what Van Gennep called the liminal phase, from the Latin word for threshold. Liminal means in between. The initiate is no longer what they were, and not yet what they will become. They are suspended in a kind of sacred nowhere, in the wilderness or the ceremony house or the dark, where the old rules do not apply and the new self is being formed in the heat of that suspension. And finally, they are reincorporated into the community in their new form, carrying their new identity, recognized as transformed. Separation, liminal, incorporation. You will recognize those three shapes. They are departure, initiation, return, wearing different names. Campbell's three acts are not a structure he invented. They are the structure Van Gennep excavated from 10,000 years of human ritual, the shape that communities across the entire surface of the world independently discovered was necessary to turn a person from one thing into another. Campbell borrowed the skeleton from anthropology and clothed it in myth. He pointed to what Van Gennep had already found and said, "Look, your stories do exactly what your rituals do. The story and the ceremony are the same machine, running the same program, because they are both trying to accomplish the same thing. They are both trying to move a human being through genuine transformation. And genuine transformation apparently requires that three-part shape, or it does not happen, or it does not feel finished. That is the first route. But there is something else, something that Grandpa finds quietly extraordinary, and it is this. The pattern was not found once, it was found twice by two men who never met, who worked in completely different traditions, using completely different methods, and who arrived at essentially the same answer. While Campbell was reading myths through the lens of Jung and Van Gennep, a Russian folklorist named Vladimir Prop was doing something else entirely on the other side of Europe. Prop was not interested in psychology. He was not interested in the inner life of the hero or the universal unconscious or the spiritual transformation of the initiate. He was a formalist, which is to say, he was interested in the structure of stories the way a botanist is interested in the structure of leaves, pure form, without asking what the leaf feels or what the tree means. In 1928, he published a book called Morphology of the Folk Tale, in which he had done something remarkably tedious and remarkably revelatory. He had read 100 Russian fairy tales and catalogued every single thing that happened in each of them, every event, every action, every function, as he called them. And he found that Russian fairy tales, all of them, contained the same 31 narrative functions, always in the same order, not the same characters, not the same settings, not the same cultural details, but the same sequence of events, the same underlying grammar of what happens and in what order it happens. 31 functions, fixed sequence every time. A member of the family leaves home or a prohibition is given and violated, a villain appears and performs villainy. The hero is called to action. A helper or a magical object appears. The hero travels, is tested, overcomes. A false hero is exposed. The hero is recognized and the villain is punished. The hero is married or ascends the throne. Prop found this from the outside, working purely with formal patterns with no reference to Jung or Van Gennep or Campbell. He was not looking for a psychological map. He was not asking what the dragon represented in the inner life of the Russian peasant. He was simply mapping the grammar, and the grammar he found was the same story, told again and again in the same order, every time. Two men, two methods, one answer. That convergence is not nothing. When a scientist and a linguist using different tools arrive at the same number independently, you take the number seriously. When a psychoanalyst and a folklorist, knowing nothing of each other's work, find the same deep structure inside the stories their cultures tell, that structure starts to feel less like a theory and more like a fact about how human imagination actually works, about what it requires, about what it is always secretly trying to do. And then there were others before Campbell too. People often think he was the first to notice that hero myths rhyme. He was not. In 1909, the same year Van Gennep published his Rites of Passage, Otto Rank, a psychoanalyst working in Freud's circle, published a book called The Myth of the Birth of the Hero. Rank had looked at the birth stories of mythological heroes, from Sargon of Akkad to Moses to Oedipus to Romulus to Jesus, and found that they followed a pattern too. The hero is born of noble or divine parents. The birth is preceded by difficulty or prophecy. The hero is abandoned or endangered shortly after birth, often in water, in a basket, on a hillside. The hero is found and raised by humble people. The hero eventually discovers his true origins and returns to claim his place. Rank trace this to Freudian psychology, to the child's complicated feelings about parents and identity and origin. He was working from a different psychological tradition than Jung, but he was finding the same echo. The story rhymes, and the reason it rhymes is something to do with the inner life of the human being telling it. And in 1936, a scholar named Lord Raglan published a book in which he laid out a 22-point heroic pattern, a kind of checklist he had applied to mythological heroes across cultures, and found that figures like Oedipus and Theseus and Moses and King Arthur all scored highly on his scale, all sharing a remarkable number of the same biographical events. Campbell synthesized all of this. He was not working in isolation. He was reading Jung and Van Gennep and Rank and Raglan and Propp, reading anthropologists and folklorists and mythologists and depth psychologists, and he brought all of it into a single frame, held together by the Jungian claim that the inner life of the human being is why the pattern keeps recurring. The archetypes in the collective unconscious are the engine. The myth is the expression. The ritual is the practice. The film is the modern version of all three, wearing a new costume. That is a remarkable synthesis. It is also, and Grandpa thinks it's important to say this plainly, a synthesis that has not gone unchallenged. Because there is a version of the monomyth theory that is easy to believe and wrong in its ease. The version that says every story is the hero's journey, that the pattern fits everything, that Campbell discovered the one true grammar of all human narrative everywhere. That version is the seductive overstatement, and Campbell sometimes made it himself, and it is worth sitting with why it is an overstatement. The folklorist Alan Dundes, among others, pointed out that the monomyth is, at least in the form Campbell used it, too flexible to falsify. If the pattern is vague enough, you can find it almost anywhere. If meeting the goddess can mean anything involving a woman, and the road of trials can mean any sequence of difficulties, and the return can mean any kind of homecoming, then almost any story will seem to fit. But a theory that fits everything proves nothing. A map that covers the entire territory is not a map. It is just the territory described in different language. Dundes and others also noted that Campbell selected his myths carefully, that the material he drew on was weighted toward particular cultures and traditions, that the universality of the pattern might partly be an artifact of the selection rather than a discovery about human nature as such. This is not a small objection. It is worth holding. And then there is the matter of stories that simply do not fit. Tragedy, for instance. Greek tragedy, which is one of the oldest and most powerful forms of storytelling that the Western world produced, does not follow the monomyth. Oedipus does not return with a boon. He arrives at a terrible knowledge that destroys him. Antigone does not integrate the shadow and achieve wholeness. She is buried alive for holding to her values, and nothing is healed. Hamlet is not a monomyth. He delays, he doubts, he acts too late, and nearly everyone dies. The ghost does not give him a magic sword and send him home triumphant. The return does not happen. The boon is not retrieved. The journey ends in catastrophe, and the kingdom passes to Fortinbras, who had nothing to do with it. If the pattern is universal, how does tragedy exist? How do stories about cycles and seasons and eternal return exist? Stories from traditions where the hero does not depart and return, but simply participates in an endless turning that has no beginning and no end. How do the great women's stories, the ones that move inward rather than outward, the ones that are about descent and rootedness rather than quest and conquest, how do they fit a template built around the adventuring, departing, slaying hero? They don't, or they fit badly, or they fit only if you bend the template until it can mean almost anything. Maureen Murdoch was a therapist and a writer, and she had studied with Campbell. She had sat with him and learned from him and taken his framework seriously. And eventually she came to him and said, "The monomyth does not describe the psychological journey that the women she worked with were actually making. Their inner work did not look like departure and dragon slaying and return. It looked like descent, like reconnection, like the recovery of something long abandoned, like the long undoing of armor that had been put on to survive in a world that didn't quite fit them. She developed what she called the heroine's journey, a different map for a different inner territory. And when she brought this to Campbell, what he reportedly told her was that women don't need to make the journey. They are, he said, the place that people are trying to get to. They are the goal. That is a hard thing to defend. Grandpa is not going to defend it. It tells you something real about the limits of Campbell's vision, about the ways in which his framework, for all its genuine brilliance, was shaped by a particular view of the human being, a view that centered a particular kind of masculine psychological development as the universal story of the soul. Meeting the goddess is a stage in the hero's journey. But what if you are the goddess? What stage is that? What does the map look like? From inside the figure the map is always trying to reach. Campbell did not fully answer that question. The monomyth honestly held is a partial map. It is an extraordinarily useful partial map. It illuminates something real about the deep structure of a great many stories in a great many cultures, and it connects that structure to something even more real about the inner process of human transformation. But it is not the whole territory. There are stories it does not touch, psychological journeys it does not trace, traditions it passed over or misread. Knowing that does not diminish what it gets right. It just means we hold it as a lens rather than a law. Now, there is one part of the journey that Campbell thought was the most important, and the most failed, and the most consistently skipped by the stories that modern audiences tell, and by the people who try to live out the journey in their own lives. It is not the call to adventure. It is not the battle with the shadow. It is not the moment of apotheosis, the moment when the hero becomes briefly something more than human, something luminous and unlimited. Those are the parts everyone loves. Those are the parts that get the music and the slow motion and the close-up. The part that Campbell thought mattered most and failed most often is the return. Coming home, bringing it back. Think about the shape of the journey for a moment. The hero goes out, they leave the ordinary world and cross into the extraordinary one. They suffer. They encounter the shadow, which is their own face in a dark mirror. They go down into the belly of the whale, into the cave, into the trash compactor, into the forest, where they face the thing they have spent their whole life running from. And there, in that depth, something breaks open. Something is found that could not have been found any other way in the ordinary world, in the life of safety and routine. A boon, an elixir, a truth, a piece of power or understanding that the hero did not have before, that the people back home do not have, that could change something if it were brought back and shared. The boon is the gift of the journey. It is what the suffering was for. It is the transformation made transferable. But getting back is hard. Campbell gave several stages to the difficulty of the return, the refusal of the return, where the hero does not want to leave the extraordinary world, where they would rather stay in the mystery than come back to the Tuesday morning world of dishes and traffic and the people who didn't go where they went and don't know what they know. Then the magic flight, the escape from the other world. Then what Campbell called the rescue from without, the help that pulls the hero back when they can't get back on their own. And then the crossing of the return threshold, which is its own ordeal, because crossing back is not simply retracing the path. You cannot return as the person who left. The threshold guardian is still there. The ordinary world is still what it was. But you are different. And the difficulty now is not how to survive the extraordinary, but how to bring what you found in the extraordinary world into the ordinary one without losing it, without having the ordinary world simply close back over your experience the way water closes over a stone. Many heroes fail at this, not in combat, not in the cave. They fail at the threshold coming home. They come back changed and find that the ordinary world has no category for what they are now, no place for what they know, and they cannot quite translate the boon into a language the people who stayed behind can receive. Moses comes down from the mountain with the tablets and finds his people dancing around a golden calf. The gap between what he found on the mountain and what the people are ready to receive is enormous. He shatters the tablets. He has to go back up. The return is not a single, clean event. It is a negotiation between two worlds that do not naturally understand each other. In the oldest version of Gilgamesh's story, Gilgamesh finds the plant of immortality at the bottom of the sea and begins to bring it home, but a serpent steals it while he sleeps, and he arrives home at the great walls of Uruk with nothing in his hands. And Campbell would say, that is not a failure of the journey. That is the truth of it. You cannot bring back immortality. What you can bring back is the knowledge that you sought it, that the search itself changed you, that you built those walls, that the walls are the boon. The ordinary world is what the extraordinary journey was in service of. Modern films are quite good at the climax. They are considerably less good at the return. The third act curtain falls on the victory, on the dragon slain, on the embrace, on the kingdom restored, and then the credits roll. We do not often see what happens when Luke goes home, when Simba has been king for 5 years, when the adventure is over and Tuesday morning has arrived again. We cut away at the apotheosis because the apotheosis is satisfying and the return is complicated. But Campbell thought the return was the whole point. The point of the journey is not the experience of the extraordinary. The point is the boon, and the boon only exists if it is brought back and shared. A journey with no return is a mystical experience, maybe a profound one, but not a completed hero's journey. The journey is complete only when the traveller becomes, as Campbell put it, the master of two worlds, equally at home in the extraordinary and the ordinary, capable of moving between them, carrying the gift of one into the vocabulary of the other. The master of two worlds, that is the final stage before what Campbell called freedom to live, the ability to live in the present without fear of death, without clinging to the past, without anxiety about the future, because you have been through the death and come back. And you know now that the self that died was not the deepest self, and the deepest self does not die. That is the journey's end, not triumph, not glory, presence. And there is one small phrase that Campbell is more famous for than almost anything else, a phrase that has been put on coffee mugs and yoga studio walls and motivational posters and graduation cards, a phrase so widely used that it has been almost entirely stripped of the root it grew from: follow your bliss. Campbell said it often. He meant something precise by it, and the precision is almost always lost. He was not saying follow your pleasure. He was not saying chase whatever makes you feel good in the moment. He was not offering a cheerful permission slip for self-indulgence. He was translating something from Sanskrit. The Upanishads, the ancient Indian philosophical texts, speak of the nature of ultimate reality in terms of three qualities: Sat, which means being, pure existence; Chit, which means consciousness, awareness; and Ananda, which means bliss. Sat, Chit, Ananda, being, consciousness, bliss, not bliss as in entertainment or excitement or the pleasant absence of difficulty. Bliss as in the quality of consciousness when it is fully alive, when it is doing what it is most essentially and deeply made to do, when it is so completely itself that the boundary between the self and the thing it is doing seems to dissolve. That is the bliss Campbell meant, the bliss of being completely what you are, the bliss that is not opposed to suffering but coexists with it, the bliss that you can feel even in the belly of the whale, if the belly of the whale is where your deepest nature has sent you. Follow the thing that makes you most completely yourself, even when it is difficult, even when it is frightening, even when it leads you away from safety. Because the self that you are when you are most completely yourself is the self on the other side of the journey, the self that has integrated the shadow and reconciled with the Father and returned from the deep water carrying what it found. Follow your bliss is not a self-help slogan. It is an invitation to undertake the hero's journey at the level of a whole life. Campbell found it in the Upanishads. He wove it into everything he taught, and like the word monomyth, borrowed from Joyce and repurposed into something new, he took old wisdom and gave it a new form and offered it to people who might never have found it otherwise. That was perhaps his own version of the return with the boon. He went into the labyrinth of 1,000 myths and came back with the thread. He brought back what he found. He shared it. And whether you think his map is complete or partial, whether you think it fits every story or only many stories, whether you think it illuminates the human psyche or flatters a particular vision of it, you cannot quite deny that the sharing changed things. George Lucas went into his films and came back with the Force. The Lion King was built on the bones of the journey in a studio boardroom. A 7-page memo by a story consultant at Disney circulated through Hollywood and reshaped how an entire generation of filmmakers thought about what a story was for and how it should move. Bill Moyers sat across from Campbell at Skywalker Ranch, and the conversation they had was broadcast on PBS in 1988, after Campbell had already died, and it became one of the most watched documentary series in the history of public television. The old man with the 1,000 myths reached out through the screen into the living rooms of people who had never read a word of the Upanishads or heard of Arnold van Gennep, and something connected. Something in the pattern recognized itself, and that is perhaps the strangest and most beautiful thing that Grandpa has been turning over all evening. Not that Campbell found a pattern, not even that Jung found an explanation for the pattern, but that the recognition, when it comes, feels like remembering rather than learning. When someone tells you the story of the hero who is called and refuses and crosses and descends and faces the thing with their own face and returns, something in you nods. Not your analytical mind, which is busily checking for logical consistency. Something deeper, something that already knew the shape of it the way your body already knows the shape of breathing. The story lands not as information but as familiarity. That is the collective unconscious, if you want Jung's name for it. That is the inheritance, the shared layer below the personal, below the cultural, below the historical, where the archetypes live in their original formlessness, ready to take any shape the dreaming imagination gives them, the shadow and the mentor and the trickster and the self. That is where the pattern lives and why it keeps surfacing in Sumerian cuneiform and in a digital animation of a lion cub on a cliff edge. The pattern surfaces because we carry it, not in our memories, not in our cultures, though our cultures have always clothed it. In the structure of what we are, Prop found 31 functions by counting, Campbell found 17 stages by reading, Van Gennep found 3 phases by watching ceremonies. Jung found the archetypes by listening to dreams. They all arrived at the same room by different doors, and the room is this. Human beings grow by descent and return. We grow by going into what we have been avoiding, by facing the thing with our face in it, by surviving what we were sure we could not survive, and by carrying what we found back into the ordinary world that thought we were gone too long and worried about us and kept the light on. That is the one story, not every story, but the one story that keeps recurring in every era, across every culture, that has left us something to read because it is the story of what transformation actually requires, not comfort, Not gradual improvement, not slow and painless accumulation. Descent, the belly, the dark, and then, if you are lucky and persistent and willing, the return with something that changes things. It fits many stories imperfectly. It fits tragedy not at all or only in shadow, as the journey that was refused or failed. It fits the heroine's psychological journey only when it is stretched and softened and sometimes broken open and rebuilt into something Murdoch's version describes better. It is a partial map, held by a particular tradition, bearing the marks of who drew it and what they could see from where they stood. But a partial map of real terrain is still a map. And this terrain is real. You know it is real because you have been in the belly. You may not have called it that. You may have called it the worst year of your life, or the thing you couldn't talk about for a long time, or the period after the phone call, or the winter you are still trying to understand. But you know the belly. You know the quality of darkness in it, the way ordinary time seems to stop, the way you are no longer the person you were before it started and not yet whatever you are going to be. You know the liminal, Van Gennep's word for it, the in-between, the threshold. And if you came through, you brought something back. You may not have known what to do with it yet. The return is always harder than anyone tells you. The ordinary world does not automatically make room for what you found in the extraordinary one. People look at you and say you seem different, and sometimes they mean it as a compliment, and sometimes they don't. The crossing back is its own ordeal. But the boon is real, the thing you know now, that you couldn't have known from the safe side of the threshold, is real. And somewhere, in someone who needs it, it can land. That is the sharing. That is the completion. That is what Campbell was pointing to when he borrowed Joyce's strange word and pressed it into the service of 10,000 years of human storytelling. Monomyth. The one story. Not because all stories are literally the same, but because the one pattern that keeps recurring is the pattern of genuine transformation, and genuine transformation is what the deepest layer of human imagination has always been trying to describe, trying to teach, trying to enact, trying to pass on. The myths were the instruction, the rituals were the practice. The films, strange and commercial and digital as they are the newest version of the same impulse to tell the story of descent and return so that the people listening will recognize it when it comes for them, and perhaps be a little less afraid, and perhaps know that the shape of what is happening to them is not chaos, not punishment, not meaningless, but the oldest and most human shape there is. A hero ventures forth from the world of common day into a region of supernatural wonder. Fabulous forces are there encountered, and a decisive victory is won. The hero comes back from this mysterious adventure with the power to bestow boons on his fellow man. That is what Campbell wrote. One sentence, borrowed word, Jungian interior, Van Gennep's bones, props grammar, 10,000 years of sitting around fires telling each other what it was like to go out into the dark and what you found there and how you made it home. The same inner program running in Sumerian clay tablets and in the blue glow of a cinema screen in the 21st century. Not because someone planned it that way, because we carry it. Because whatever layer of the mind Jung was listening to when his patients dreamed of dragons and wise old men and dark doubles and luminous depths, that layer has not changed. It was there when Gilgamesh stood at the edge of the waters of death and decided to keep going. It was there when a shepherd's son stood before a burning bush and heard something ask him to take off his shoes because the ground he was standing on was holy. It was there when a young man on a desert planet looked up at a twin sunset and felt something pull at him that he couldn't name yet. It is there in you, in whatever version of the threshold you are near or have already crossed. in whatever belly you have been in or are in now, in whatever you are carrying back that you haven't quite figured out how to share yet. The story knows the shape of you, it always has. And now the hour is late, and the images are settling, and Grandpa wants to gather them gently before we part. We have met James Joyce, who coined a word as a joke in a novel almost no one finishes, and the word became the secret door into everything. We have sat with Campbell, the man who went into the labyrinth of 1,000 stories and came back with the thread. We have spent time with Jung, the doctor, who listened to dreams until the dreams began to show him a map of the inner country that the hero's outer journey has always secretly been drawing. We have walked the stages, the call and the refusal, and the crossing and the belly and the road of trials, and the meeting with the deep interior self, and the atonement and the apotheosis, and the long, difficult, most important return. We have seen the shadow in the cave with Luke's face, and Simba in the sky hearing his father's voice, and Moses on the mountain holding something almost too heavy to carry back down. We have sat with the honest limits of the map, and with the woman who told Campbell it didn't quite fit her terrain, and with what he said in reply, which was hard to defend. We have held Van Gennep's 3 phases and Prop's 31 functions, and the quiet, extraordinary fact that 2 men, using opposite methods, found the same answer. And we have arrived at the one sentence at the center of all of it, Sat Chit Ananda, being consciousness, bliss. Follow the thing that makes you most completely yourself. Not because it will be easy, because it is real. You don't need to hold all of it. You don't need to remember the 17 stages or the Jungian roster or which stage belongs to which act. If one image stayed with you tonight, let that be the one. If it was the belly of the whale, where the old self dies so the new one can begin, let it be that. If it was the shadow with your own face, let it be that. If it was the return, the hard crossing back, the boon that has to be shared, or it isn't a boon, let it be that. Let it settle in the way that good things settle when you stop trying to hold them and simply allow them to be there. You have been listening, and the night has been generous with its quiet, and there is nothing more to figure out and nowhere else to be. Enough stories for one night. Off to sleep now, Grandpa says.